Where is heaven? If I asked you to point me in the direction of heaven, where would you point? I wonder, would you perhaps point upwards? Last Thursday we marked Ascension Day, 40 days since Easter, 40 days that the resurrected Jesus spent with his friends and followers, continuing to teach them, but teaching them knowing that shortly he'd be handing over responsibility for sharing the good news to them. Perhaps you might remember the last chapter of John's Gospel, where in addition to catching 153 fish and sharing a barbecue on the beach, Jesus has a conversation with Peter, showing that despite having thrice denied him, Jesus still wants Peter to care for his sheep. Jesus is entrusting the mission to him and to the other disciples. Or you might think about the various readings we've had over the last few weeks, where we've heard about the work of other disciples as they have shared the news. You might think perhaps of Philip teaching and baptizing the Ethiopian eunuch, and like me, you might have been wondering about the practicalities of doing that in a chariot whilst it's moving. But after 40 days, Jesus ascended, went up to heaven. Luke gives us two accounts of this, one at the end of his gospel and the other, as we've just heard, at the start of the book of Acts. And as we heard in the Acts account, Luke says, after he said this, he was taken up before their eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. This image of Jesus rising up and being hidden from their sight by clouds, an image depicted in art and stained glass, indeed including one of our windows next to the altar, suggests that heaven is somewhere up, somewhere in the sky. Indeed, sometimes the sky is referred to as the heavens. Think of the phrase, "and the heavens opened," when we're referring to a sudden downpour of rain. Hopefully not today. Or we look heavenward. We generally are looking up. Indeed, as he was martyred, Stephen looks up and sees Jesus at the right hand of God. At Jesus' baptism, heaven opened and a dove descended, again suggesting heaven was up. Or in John, Jesus says, "For I have come down from heaven." And there are many more examples, so we could very easily be forgiven for saying that heaven is up. But if heaven is up in the sky somewhere, how do we reconcile spacecraft flying many miles, even millions of miles above the earth, and apparently not bumping into heaven on their way? Now, in considering heaven and where it is, we're considering the divine, and yet we're doing so within the limited capacity of our human brains. Sometimes we find it easier to simplify things so we can have some grasp of them. For some, the idea of heaven being somewhere above us is helpful, as it was to the early Christians giving an account of how the physical Jesus went from their presence, or indeed for artists depicting the event. Whilst in the 21st century, with the advances in space travel and astronomy, some might find this a little too simplistic. However, those same people might still think of heaven as being up because they see it as a state higher than our current existence here on earth. Higher, of course, can mean more worthy, more significant. But we also think of it as being above. So if we're looking for it, we naturally look up. Helpfully, Jesus talks a lot about heaven, but he talks even more about the kingdom or the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's like yeast, is like treasure hidden, is like a merchant And the list goes on and on. I said helpfully. Actually, when he talks about heaven, often he uses images that need a lot of unpacking. And so what these and other examples, but what these and other examples Jesus uses seem to focus on is the ordinary. Many of us may have used yeast to make bread or beer, perhaps. As children, we might have planted mustard, though a much smaller version of the plant than the mustard tree Jesus describes. We might have planted mustard on some damp kitchen paper. We can imagine the idea of hidden treasure or a merchant. These are ordinary things, suggesting that the kingdom of heaven could be all around us. Indeed, in Matthew 26, where we have the story of the king separating the sheep and the goats, the righteous are surprised that their actions of feeding the hungry, giving refreshment to the thirsty, inviting in the stranger, clothing the naked, looking after the sick, and visiting those in prison was somehow for Jesus. As to them, these are natural and ordinary actions that they almost overlooked that they had done. And yet, these actions have brought them closer to Jesus, closer to God, and closer to building the kingdom of heaven. But note, the righteous in Matthew 26 didn't do these things for reward or recognition that they might receive. They did them because they saw this as the natural, ordinary way of behaving. So what do my ramblings about heaven have to do with ascension? In his conversation with Nicodemus in John 3, Jesus says that no one has ever gone to heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. The Son of Man being a way that in John Jesus refers to himself. Up until this point, heaven had been closed because of the fall in the story of Adam and Eve. And at death, all people went to Sheol. Sheol, a Hebrew word that's sometimes translated in English as the grave, or in the King James Version as hell. All people went there. And tradition holds that between the crucifixion and the resurrection, Jesus descended to Sheol to free those who had already died so they could take their place in heaven. In the Apostles' Creed, we affirm this in the line, was crucified, died and was buried, he descended to the dead, or in the Book of Common Prayer, he descended to hell. In the Ascension, we have part of heaven coming down to earth and then returning to heaven in the person of Jesus. The new creation of heaven and earth coming closer together has well and truly started. And part of heaven has been left with us when Jesus returned to heaven. His teaching of how we should live, how we should love God, how we should behave toward one another. But this is not so that we can earn our way into heaven. This is not something we are ever able to do. We're never able to do enough to deserve. And yet, through God's grace, we can be welcomed in. And yet, we can still show our love for God and for one another in how we live our lives, live out our time here on earth, how we express our faith as Christians to each other and those around us. This is something your PCC has been considering over the last few months. How do we as a church express our love and faith to each other and to the wider community? In our Lent study this year, we used the diocesan Come and See course, which focused on the commandments to love God and to love your neighbour. And so, as a PCC, we've considering what practical things we could do in church and in the wider community to express this love, for us to care for each other and for our community. Now, we're not doing this because we want to win any brownie points, nor are we doing it because we feel we must. We're doing it because it's part of what being a Christian is, just as we see in the accounts of the early followers of Christ in the book of Acts. We already have a number of suggestions. Some are quite detailed, whilst others are more generic or high level. And these have been put on some boards at the side of church. You may have noticed them as you came in. And after the service, there will be an opportunity for you to review these and to add to any suggestions that you may have. And you will find coloured post-it notes for this. But whatever things we do will take resources, people and money to make them happen. So you're also asked if you are able to help with some of these. And we're asking you to start by helping us to prioritise which we should focus on first, and also those where you might be able to help us. It may be that they are different things, and that help can be as the form as a volunteer or offering some form of financial support, or possibly doing both. To do this, you will find at the back of church there are some stickers. And you're invited to take 3 red stickers and 3 green stickers, and to place a red sticker against each of the 3 ideas that you think we should focus on first, and to put a green sticker against the 3 ideas that you're able to help make happen with your either practical support or your financial support. Those attending at 10:45 will be asked to do the same. Later today, we're inviting the wider community as well as the church community to join us for some tea and cake and to add their ideas and help us to continue the prioritisation process. Sparklers will be invited to take part tomorrow, and likewise, we will ask the midweek communion congregation to take part on Thursday. This can be our local part of helping to build the kingdom of heaven. So in future, when I ask you where heaven is, perhaps you will be able to reply by saying, well, a little bit of it is here in Wendover.
It's that time of the service, now ready for notices, but not too many this morning. After the service, as Matthew mentioned, if you could please take some time to just have a look along at the boards and pray and reflect on any ideas, hopes that you may have. And as Matthew spoke about again, there's little dots which is all explained there as well. Sally, did you want to take over at this point? You're quite... Thank you.
Can you say that next Sunday?
I would, yes.
I just want to come and say, Barbara's now saying I don't need an ambulance. She does. So we're waiting for an ambulance. And Peter Lockett's been to get her to tell her son. So he'll be able to come. So when you're leaving, I think if you can just not necessarily go and fuss over Barbara, because that's the absolute worst thing. She feels embarrassed because it's happening in church. Yeah. We've told her it's actually far better it was here than at home. Yeah. But keep her in your prayers, please.
Thanks, Sally. Thank you. Next Sunday, 4 o'clock, is a special evensong as we celebrate with Anne Berry her 100th birthday. So 4 o'clock next Sunday. And as you can see, Christian Aid has started this week, so please, I think there's a few more bundles left there. Is that right, Jeanette? Just a couple. So if you are able to just deliver nothing else, that would be wonderful. 25th of May, 2 o'clock until 4 is the Wendover tea dance again. So please do come along. It is such good fun. I encourage you. We have a dedicated team of live streamers. They are wonderful. But we're short. We need a few more. So if that's something you think you can do, could you please speak to Sally, myself, or Matthew? That would be wonderful. And that is it for today. So as Sally said, please hold Barbara in your prayers. She, I know, will be distraught that this has happened, but in church, but the best place for it to happen for her. So please do continue to pray for Barbara.